E hoa atua.
To the Minister of Foreign Affairs, what new commitments, if any, has the government made to protect Aotearoa?
Because no such country exists, we made no such commitments. The name of this country is New Zealand.
Waka Kotahi will begin referring to itself using its English name first after pressure from parties in the coalition government. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has said he met many people on the campaign trail who could not differentiate between government agency names.
Education Minister Erica Stanford has imposed a near total ban on Māori words in new editions to a series of books used to teach 5-year-olds to read.
The government's redesigning the country's passport to put English text before te reo.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, there's been a noticeable rise in resistance to te reo Māori and Māori cultural presence in public life, led by the coalition government. So is New Zealand at risk of losing its cultural identity?
Devastating is a word that is used by many in Te Ao Māori to describe what's going on.
So racism is a real issue in this country.
Today we look at what's really driving the pushback and what the fallout could be. I talked to RNZ's in-depth long-form Māori journalist Alice Stewart and Associate Professor Awanui Te Huia, who teaches Māori studies at Victoria University. Let's start with Ala.
I te taha o tōku mama, on my mum's side, I'm from the Norte Northa, from the north. And then on my dad's side, I'm from England. So, bit of mix of whakapapa there. Both of the two, perfect mix, I say. Yeah.
I love that. I want to talk, obviously, we've got a pushback at the moment of te reo and tikanga in New Zealand. You have been working on this. Can you list for me some of the things, even all of the things that have been happening over the last couple of years and the pushback that we're having?
Well, first off, you've got two things happening here, right? You've got these sort of large-scale legislative shifts, and then you've got the smaller, more symbolic changes. So there's two different types. And under those categories, you've got, the repeal of smoke-free legislation that happened quite early when the new coalition government came in. You've got the disestablishment of Te Aka Whaiora, the Māori Health Authority. You've got the Regulatory Standards Bill. You've got the review of the Māori and Pacific Admission Scheme into med school. Stuff like the review of the Waitangi Tribunal, which is to refocus it back to its original scope and purpose. You've got foreshore and seabed changes. You've got the Treaty Principles Bill, which has been killed now. The reintroduction of the mandatory referendums for establishing and maintaining Māori wards on local governments. The removal of Section 7AA from Oranga Tamariki. You've got a funding cut of Te Ahu o Te Reo Māori, which is a Te Reo Māori initiative for teachers. And then you've got kind of more social shifts, right? Which is that stuff like the government directing all ministries to use their English name before their Te Reo Māori name. You've got things like Winston Peters saying in the House to use New Zealand instead of Aotearoa. You've got Winston Peters also interfering when he saw that listing on Seek for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs job advertisement for a tikanga lead. He said, get rid of that. Undoubtedly, it was back in the next week. So you've kind of got a raft of things. I mean, there really are so many things, but it is that difference between legislative shifts and then things that are more, I suppose, societal, less tangible changes. Yeah, lots of stuff.
What's driving this? What's behind this and the fallout from it?
Well, I would say that is the main question I'm asked as a Māori journalist, is what's driving this? Where did it come from? And that's quite hard to pin down because we have these more minor parties in government, really the use of MMP properly, right? They're smaller parties and they're the ones driving the change. I think you're seeing less of that from the National Party, which does track. You're seeing more of it from New Zealand First and the ACT Party.
Māori victimisation by criminals, Māori unemployment, Māori incomes and life expectancy. None of it's good news, and none of it's getting better because of arguments like we heard from the first speaker, that we were here first, so we have a special place forever and a day.
Thank you very much for your questions, including the racist ones, and we'll see you later.
And you might remember before the election in 2023, you're really testing my memory here, we saw the likes of Julian Batchelor, who was anti-co-governance.
Co-governance, it's an interesting concept, one that seems pretty aloof to most people at the moment, but basically it is giving Māori a seat at the table. At least that's how it is being sold.
We saw quite a lot of, maybe lobbyists is the wrong word, but these people on the right kind of pushing an agenda and then seeing how it has played out in the government is quite a different thing. So yeah, it's hard to know where it's coming from, but when you look at the previous Labour government, they really pushed for a lot of this change and a lot of these policies that did allow for more co-governance, right? So you saw a lot more of that, a lot more funding initiatives for Māori, and I suppose we're seeing a rollback of that, right? So we're seeing a rollback, but we're also seeing some policies that people are calling anti-Māori as well. They're perceived as anti-Māori. So yes, two things there, but I would say it comes from the Labour government previously putting in a lot of those kind of initiatives.
How is the Māori community responding to Winston, the ACT Party, and this pushback?
I've spoken to a raft of people in my personal life, but also just in reporting around experts and stuff. I remember speaking to Whaia Tureti Moxon actually a couple of weeks ago, and she said that this partnership that's been forged many years ago, over decades and decades, to get to a point where Māori are actually at the decision-making table, she said that's all been taken away. She's quite strong on it. She's a health advocate, so she's strong on the disestablishment of Te Aka Whaiora, the Māori Health Authority. She said all of that has been taken away. You've also got legal scholars, Māori legal scholars, Tiriti treaty experts like Cowan Jones, who said that, this is what he said to me, we're seeing that this government has a clear strategy of removing Māori rights and removing the ability of Te Tiriti to have any impact in our law. So it's quite strong. Those are just some opinions from experts who are Māori and from academia, but also in my personal life, I think, speaking to a lot of whānau Māori, I think they're mainly upset because there are some issues that are being focused on that arguably the government could be spending time doing something more important. And that's what we saw actually last week with the head of the Runanga from Ngaitahu, Justin Tipa. He said that he just wants the government to focus on more pressing issues for our people, rather than should the name of New Zealand be New Zealand or Aotearoa, maybe focus on how you can further our people. I think that was his viewpoint. So there is a kind of consensus that why are we focusing on that?
But many Kiwis say they don't want the Māori language and culture forced down their throats.
In a recent council meeting, Mayor Craig Jepson stopped new Māori ward councillor Pera Paniora from starting with a karakia.
Do you get that, and sort of what's your response to that?
It's really hard to know how many New Zealanders do believe in these policies, right? But it comes from a place of ignorance, right? You don't know what you don't know, and I think that's fine. There are lots of people who don't know how to pronounce Te Reo Māori words. Maybe they're finding that they're feeling a bit freaked out that they don't know how to say that, and they're receiving a bit of pushback from the left. People don't know what they don't know. They don't know how to say Te Reo Māori words. I say kei te pai. Let's bring people on the journey, right? I don't know. It's a really tricky one to know that people are out there freaking out about it, because it's nothing to be scared of. Te Reo Māori in particular, and that's what I'm talking about here, is there's nothing to be scared about around Te Reo Māori.
I put that same question to Victoria University Associate Professor Awanui Tuhuia. How does she respond to Kiwis saying, don't force your Māori language and culture on me?
These are a group of people in our society that perhaps haven't had the opportunity to see the beauty that having Māori language, having Māori cultural ways of being, informing their thinking, what that could do, what that could add to their lives, what that could bring to who they are as people. If we can work with people to unpack what it is that they are threatened by when they see Te Reo Māori thriving in various aspects of our community, it's not a zero-sum game. So if Te Reo Māori is doing well, that does not take away anything from another person. It's additive. And, at the heart of it is fear and anxiety about what perhaps it means if somebody isn't able to use one of the national languages of this country, and perhaps there's a perceived deficit within one's own psyche. And so I would encourage those people to keep an open heart, keep an open mind, and think about this as an opportunity for growth as opposed to how they may be perceiving the situation.
Awanui, are we a racist country?
We have seen a lot of research that's come through And there is considerable racism that happens in our communities, and that has multiple implications across the spectrum. You know, economics, it has an impact on our socio-political spectrums. And so racism is a real issue in this country, and we need to understand what the root cause of some of those actions are. And I think, you know, we have seen some of the real harm that can be created through racism, and particularly when individuals are emboldened to acts of racism. And, you know, we know for the language in particular, for Te Reo Māori, that racism has a direct impact on how many people attempt to engage in learning Te Reo Māori, where they use the language, how openly they use the language. And so racism hurts everybody. Racism is something that has its roots stemmed in ill faith. And so I think, you know, we need to be very conscious of the fact that this is an issue for us as a nation, and we need to be finding solutions so that we can live in the communities that we aspire to living in, and so that all of our people, the most vulnerable of our populations, are taken care of. And I think if we're judging our nation by our vulnerable populations, this is where our attention needs to fall, you know, if I'm thinking about those 5 generations to come.
Okay. Moko puna, are you listening? On your whenua, truth is glistening. A terrible flight, our tiriti ride, marching on stolen Māori land.
This is Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi singing in Parliament at the end of last year.
This year ain't been pretty. Toi tu te tiriti, a 3-headed goose, but we know the truth. Marching on stolen Māori land.
Awanui says the pushback against Te Reo Māori is largely driven at a government level, not by everyday New Zealanders, and she's heartened by the latter's work and commitment to revitalise her language.
We have many beautiful examples of how we are attempting as a very small nation to revitalise our language, and a lot of other, you know, colonial nations have used the examples that have come from Aotearoa in their own planning for language revitalisation. So when I see, you know, examples coming through from these older members of society, I do feel aroha, I feel compassion for the experiences that have perhaps informed their thinking, because this is certainly not the Aotearoa Hou, this is not the New Zealand that we are planning for, and that, you know, the government themselves had put plans together for 1 million speakers by the year 2040 to, you know, 200 years since the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And I still think that we need to keep those dates in mind. We need to keep those aspirations in mind.
In the beehive they can build a front man, act like there's not a racist clown.
What are the benefits of having a country that embraces its cultural identity, that speaks te reo and knows who we are?
Yeah, as somebody who comes from, you know, a bicultural lineage, I can see the real opportunity here. And, you know, as somebody who's also travelled internationally, it is something that I see on a regular basis where we have not only Māori, but Kiwis, other Pākehā, non-Māori. When we are in these international contexts, Te Reo Māori and the connection and the relationships that people have with who we are as Māori and as a bicultural nation founded on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, these offer real opportunities to provide distinction in our identity and who we want to be as a nation. I think if we go back to why this is important for Aotearoa, we want to be a country that leads with our heart. We want to be a country that demonstrates that we can acknowledge, you know, the historical injustices that have created the conditions where we're actually having to revitalise our language. and making the positive changes that are required in order for us to have a thriving Indigenous language that we don't feel threatened by, that is a real positive. It's a bonus. It's a plus. It's all of the positive things that go with the uniqueness of what Aotearoa can be.
For non-Māori New Zealanders, what do you think they stand to lose if te reo Māori and tikanga are diminished?
That's an excellent point. So, we have a lot of discourse about endangered species. These are all tied together. So, if we were to lose te reo Māori, what we lose is something far greater than the sum of its parts. So I don't think that we are going down that route at the moment. So we as Māori who are invested in the revitalisation of our language, who are raising our children in the language as best we can with the limited resources that we have, we are focused on, in Aotearoa Hou, we are focused on providing opportunities for our kids to see themselves in their environment. We're providing opportunities for friendships to develop. And through our children, I listened to a podcast from Molly. She's an Irish woman who is, revitalising her language.
Studies have shown that learning your native language, learning any language, but especially your ancestral tongue, brings feelings of comfort and freedom. And especially when considering our past and our heritage, learning Irish is very revealing and very healing.
And so for us as iwi Māori, we are not thinking about these deathly narratives. We're not thinking about what happens if the language dies. We're thinking about how do we create a future where te reo Māori is thriving and where all of our children are able to use the language in its natural form across context. And so we have these opportunities to change our thinking and to understand that some of these older ways of, these fear-based ways of thinking actually need to be addressed, because there's so much positive growth that can happen for our people when we meaningfully engage in te tiriti waitangi discourses, when we unpack what the historical conditions have created in Aotearoa. This can create massive opportunities, and I've seen within our own classes the change that happens in Pākehā students in terms of their own identity progressions. It allows them to think about their identities in different ways, and so a lot of our research has focused on those positive benefits.
Now, this is a tough question, a personal question, but have you seen or experienced an increase in racist remarks or racism in New Zealand over the past couple of years since this pushback has started to happen?
The issue that, these policies have created is it emboldens those positions, and it treats the irrational as rational. So when we're hearing these anti-tiriti or waitangi statements, when we hear these anti-Māori, anti-reo Māori statements, and they are being put forward as rational and considered arguments, this is where we have some of the trouble. What it does is it platforms particular perspectives that are harmful for our community. They're harmful for cohesion. What we need to be invested in is community cohesion. We need to be thinking about ways in which we can come together in a meaningful way that allows these difficult conversations to happen in good faith, and that's what's missing here.
Alice Stewart covers all aspects of Māoridom, so I asked her if she's changed or tweaked her style following the policies and the pushback.
I think as a Māori journalist, we always face a bit of backlash around reporting on the Māori world and reporting using te reo Māori, because there are people that don't know te reo Māori, and a big part of my job is actually making that more accessible. So I do get emails that are like, why did you use that Māori word? What does that mean? And, I actually am happy to engage and say, this is what it means, because I'm on the journey of making sure everyone's on the journey with me. Have I seen more of a backlash since the government came in? I wouldn't say so. I've always faced those emails or those phone calls that are, why are you using that? In terms of the change in my reporting, I think there has been such a decrease in trust in the media. And so more than ever am I so vigilant and mindful of how we can take people on the journey and make it as accessible as possible. So because my job is mainly focusing on doing Māori stories for Māori, I also want to make sure that it's accessible for the whole of New Zealand. And so I'm happy to put a translation in brackets to say, this word means this because I'm all about that. So am I tweaking it more because of what's been happening in society? I don't think so. I've always done that, but it certainly made me pause for thought and go, okay, there is this sort of pushback on Te Reo Māori. How can we make it more accessible so that people aren't scared?
Because in your words, how important is the Māori culture and identity to New Zealand?
Well, that's the thing, right? And I think that is the discussion and the topic we're having such a struggle with as New Zealanders right now, really wrestling with this, with our colonial past and then our identity as a country. How do we wrestle those two things and find a place for everyone here? Because we're such a melting pot of cultures. We've seen rhetoric, go back to where you came from, you're not mana whenua, and that's really polarising as well. We're seeing things from both sides of the political spectrum from my perspective. We're seeing polarisation from the left and the right. And where does Te Reo Māori and Te Ao Māori sit in New Zealand? I think it has a really prominent place here. Our tupuna, my tupuna, have fought for generations to bring the revitalisation of Te Reo Māori back, and everyone knows that Te Reo Māori and Te Ao Māori, the Māori world and the Māori language sit side by side. You can't have one without the other. And I think once you start learning Te Reo Māori, you really learn a lot about the Māori world. And so it is really important for our society, especially because we've fought for things like kohanga reo, like kura kaupapa, to maintain those things. I think broadly, they are still being retained. I think there's a lot of hope and joy out there that people maybe don't see in the news because as journalists, we report on the bad things that are happening, right? We don't report on the wait times for Te Reo Māori courses that are happening, that it takes, a year to get in to Te Wānanga o Aotearoa because there's so many people that want to take it up. And when you're at Noho Marae, there's marae stays that you do during your year of learning Te Reo Māori, that you're celebrating, you're singing in Te Reo Māori. So I think there is a lot that you don't see in regards to the revitalisation and, I suppose, maintaining the Māori language in New Zealand. A lot of people are on the waka, as we say.
So with this in mind, does she think New Zealand is a racist country?
Are we a racist country? Is such a loaded question, Amanda. I think no. I'm gonna say no. We're not a racist country. I think we have a really tough colonial past, and I think there are parts of society that are ignorant and don't have the knowledge to get on the waka. And so they may hold some racist stereotypes in their mind of what Te Ao Māori are and what our people look like and sound like and do with their lives. I wouldn't say we're a racist country, which may be controversial because I remember one very famous Māori director, Taika Waititi, saying, yes, we are.
Taika Waititi says New Zealand is as racist as... It started with F, okay, so you know what it says.
Is that a useful thing in the conversation? I don't know if it is. Is it a useful thing to say, yes, we're a racist country? I think a lot of people are battling with naivety and ignorance. They don't know things. They don't know about our colonial past. And if we help educate people, get them on the waka, we'll see less of that.
That's all for today. The Detail is a Newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Alice Stewart and Awanui Tuhuia. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Phil Benj. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.